Hi there, I'm Rebecca and a really warm welcome back to my channel, Created by Rebecca. In this week's video we are making this hand-painted Mother's Day card for my mother-in-law. We'll be giving it to her shortly. We have a circlet of watercolour primroses and dog violets, and we've made that up into a full greetings card for her. Let's get started. I'm starting out my card with a little sketch of the two flowers that I want to use in the little circlet. I'm using primroses and dog violets, and I'm just working out how the petals sit, the basic shapes of them, just so I have an idea. And then I've also roughed out an idea of the little circlet that I'm going to use. I could call it a wreath, but that might sound a bit festive or a bit morbid, so we're going to call it a circlet. And I want it so that the primroses are dotted around. I don't want them in a very even pattern, which is very unlike me. I do like things quite ordered. Having chosen the card that I'm going to be putting this onto, I've cut a piece of Clairefontaine watercolour paper to match that size exactly, and then I have marked the centre by taking a ruler across the diagonals from point to point, marking, and then doing the same the other way, marking, and then I know exactly where the centre of that piece of paper is. And I've sketched out my little circlet again within that shape, knowing that that is the size of my card, and I want to put a couple of coloured paper borders on at least, so it needs to be smaller than that, so that's going to help keep me in scale. I'm using my Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolours. We're going to use a very limited palette of colours, but it's useful to have other ones to just mix in, and you'll see as I go along that I do quite a bit of that. I very rarely use colours straight out of the pan. I've taped my watercolour paper down to my table, just with a little bit of washi tape. And now I'm taking, this is a Staedtler black eraser, I really like using this one, and I'm just knocking the drawing right back. The trouble with watercolour is that once you put it on top of pencil, it kind of seals in that graphite, and it's nigh on impossible to get it off again. So better to reduce your sketch layer right down to so you can only just see it, and then you will be able to hide it within the painting. My brush is the ProArt Proline size 7. It's a synthetic brush. It's a really good size, nice amount of spring in the bristles. I picked some primroses and dog violets out of the woodland garden this morning, just so I can use them as a proper reference rather than using photo reference. You can see that the petals are arranged around a central well, and that's where the stamen and pollen and nectar and all of that sort of business is. It's held down in that little well, and the petals form a kind of chubby star before they then come up out of that well and flare off. They're 5-petaled, nice, almost heart-shaped petals, perfect little hearts, and they overlap quite a lot. You can see that for almost half their length they overlap each other and then just suddenly break away as the hearts start to curve round to form the top. I'm just activating some of the colours in my watercolour set. I think I'm primarily going to be using lemon yellow, gamboge for the stronger, almost orangey yellow colour. But initially, just to make that little chubby star and the well, I'm using lemon yellow with a touch of sap green, and then I'm just warming it up a fraction with cadmium yellow hue. And that's going to make a slightly greenish yellow to sort of look a bit like a shadow, because that's basically what we are. We're in a well, so it's in shadow compared to the rest of the petals. Then just with the point of the brush, I'm forming those little stars because they inform the rest of the petal layout. Here I have gamboge, quite a strong concentration of gamboge, and I am laying dabs of it around that central star, but I'm not lining them up with the points of the chubby star. I'm actually lining them up with the middle. Hopefully you'll be able to see that when we get into some detail. To be honest, you're not going to notice really once the whole thing is done, but you know, as this is a mildly botanical type painting, let's get our details right. Then I've just blended that gamboge out a touch. So I've got some more lemon yellow going into a clean well, and then in this pan I have Daniel Smith's Buff Titanium. Now that's a slightly opaque colour, and it tends to pastelise colours as well. I want to make the lemon yellow a little bit less acid and a bit more buttery. Here we're looking at the flowers in a little bit more detail. So hopefully you can see that kind of chubby star in the centre, and you can see that my gamboge marks are those bright yellow points of the heart of each petal, and the petal flares up and away and then back down and round to form that heart, and they all sit differently. So some flowers will have one petal that sits right on the very top, and all the others are overlapped underneath. Some will have two, some will have three. It just depends how it has grown and developed and opened. I haven't practiced this at all. So the first petal I put down, I tried to almost use as a one-stroke mark where you lay down one comma shape and then another comma shape, but the brush wasn't really happy about that, and the paper was absorbing the paint, and so I gave up with that. And instead I use a mixture of sort of trying to just push the paint around into the shape I want, to actually drawing out the heart shape with the brush and then filling back in. Be really careful if you try and do that outlining, because what you don't want to do is go and outline all your petals and then come back and fill them in, because you will get a tide line where the paint has started to dry. So if you're going to do it, draw your outline and immediately fill that in with the colour, and then move on to your next petal. Here we're looking at the dog violets. So these are also 5-petaled. They have 2 that point upwards. Then they have one central one that points downwards a bit like a tongue. And then it has 2 wings that flare off to the side. They are significantly smaller than the primrose, so they make a really nice combination of size, texture and intensity of colour. And for this we're going to use dioxazine purple, which used to be called Windsor Violet. I've laid out the top 2 petals of each flower. Then I've mixed a tiny bit of phthalo blue into the dioxazine purple, and I've used that to do the lower petals. I've got a little bit of perylene green in the next well on my palette, so I'm mixing that with a little bit of phthalo blue and really diluting it, and then I'm going to use that to make some sort of eucalyptus leaf shapes, and they'll be the foliage for the circlet. I did consider maybe putting some like willowy twiggy bits in between, but I liked this really limited palette. I didn't want to add any brownish colours. I could have done it with green, but it kind of didn't need it. Knowing that this isn't the full card, that there's more to happen to it, I felt like any more would be too much. I did put some areas of slightly stronger perylene green over the top just to add a bit of depth, but then where the spaces were, I just used a really light wash of the bluey green just to give the impression of fullness, completeness to the circlet. Now I've got one of my ProArt Masterstroke Series 60 miniature brushes, and I'm using basically perylene green to just put in a tiny stroke to act as a shadow line where the petals are overlapping. I'm not doing it on every single one, and I am immediately coming in with a little bit of kitchen roll and just lightly dabbing some of that colour off. It looks like I'm pressing quite hard, but I'm not. I'm just barely touching the surface. I just want to lighten it. Don't want it to be a really hard crisp line, but I also don't want it to blur out to nothing. And then I'm using a little bit more perylene green to really sort of pick out the shadow of that central well of each of the primroses. I'm not going to do any more to the dog violets. I think they're pretty enough as they are. You could do, but I really want the primroses to be the main focus of the circlet. I let that dry naturally so that the paper could flatten out, and now I'm taking off all the washi tape. I'm cutting a piece of aqua coloured cardstock that's the same size as the greetings card that I'm going to use, so it's going to cover the entire face of that card. It will give it a bit of rigidity, but it will also really show off the colours of the card. Imagine a painting without mats on it. They look very different to when they do have mats on them. So I'm just checking here that the aqua colour is the right size. It's from the company Lawn Fawn, and it's a Lawn Fundamental rainbow cardstock, and I'm using the aqua and that violet colour as well. It's an American company, so the paper is American sizes, and I'm going to place that violet colour immediately between the watercolour paper and the aqua colour, just to really give a crisp, sharp edge. Now I'm happy. I'm sticking some acid-free double-sided tape onto the aqua cardstock, which I am then sticking to the front of my card. And using a Teflon coated bone folder just to really burnish it on. I've trimmed a little excess off the borders of the watercolour paper. We knew that was too big, we knew that it was the size of the finished card, so we knew we needed to trim some off. And then I've stuck that to the very corner of the violet coloured cardstock and trimmed that to size, so it just gives a really nice, sharp but deep detail. And then I've stuck the painting with the violet card onto the green cardstock, which is also stuck to the finished card. Off camera, I went to my Sizzix Big Shot die cutting machine, and I've got this really lovely big die that's just happy. So I cut that out of a deeper aqua, almost teal colour cardstock. And then, because I want that happy to have a little bit of dimension, I want it to stand up away from the card just a little bit. Rather than using foam, I'm actually cutting 2 more pieces of white cardstock which I can layer behind. In the precision glue bottle that you can see, I'm using Ranger Multi-Medium Matte, which is, it's a clever beastie. You can use it for gluing, transferring images, sealing things, so almost like a varnish. I love it as my adhesive. I hated using liquid adhesive on cards until I found this one, and now, other than a double-sided tape, I don't really use anything but the multi-medium matte. You can get it in a little bottle, which is maybe a little bit smaller than the squeezy bottle you can see, or you can get a little tub which is 113 millilitres, and it does really last, and it actually keeps really well in that tub as well. So first I stick 1 layer of the white cardstock to the back of the teal, and then I come along and stick the second one on, and it adds just a nice thickness. Now I'm using that little offcut of card that I cut the white happies from. I've put it into my stamp positioning tool. I've taken a really simple Mother's Day from the clear stamp set that I've got here. It's just got some really nice simple sayings on it. I've laid that face down on my little scrap of card in the right position, and then I've shut the door of my stamp positioning tool to pick up that stamp. Then I'm using some Gina K amalgam ink in the colour Obsidian to stamp it. And because I've used a stamp positioning tool and it's not quite as dark as I would like it, I can re-stamp it without worrying about lining it up perfectly. The stamp positioning tool does all that for me. I let that dry for a few seconds, and then using my T-square I marked pencil lines to where I wanted to cut, and using scissors I cut that out, which is quite daring for me. I'm not very good with scissors at all. Can't cut a straight line to save my life, but it worked. Then I'm going back over with my black eraser and just giving the surface a final erasing just to make sure there aren't any lurking pencil marks. I'm double checking which way the card opens before I stick my sentiments on the front. I prefer a book opening style as opposed to a tent opening, because I find after a while the tent opening ones tend to sag quite a lot in the middle. Then I am taking my happy, and with my T-square pushed right up against the edge of the card, I can line the bottom of the H and the bottom of the second P up on my ruler, because they line up with each other. Although it looks quite jumbly, those two do line up. And I can use liquid glue to just give me a little bit of wiggle room. And as you saw, I knocked it, which was very clever, but luckily it hadn't completely stuck, so I had time to just move it. And then I'm just popping some more glue onto the back of the Mother's Day strip and laying that artistically across the front of the happy sentiment. And of course my T-square is very handy to make sure that's all nice and lined up again. You could, if you wanted to, add some gemstones, some pearls, any sort of stick-on embellishments you want to, if you wanted to give it a little bit of a twinkle. I actually think I like this just as it is. I normally do put little sparkly bits on my cards, but I don't think this one needs it. But I will add one of my little labels to the back. These are incredibly useful, especially when I forget to write inside my card. The recipient still knows that I made it, and therefore it's probably come from me. I have done that too many times to mention, and you need only ask my nephew and my mother-in-law who is going to be the recipient of this particular card. It's kind of embarrassing, but for me the card is the thing, not the writing of the message inside. And then with a pencil I am just popping my initials discreetly underneath one of those dog violets. Right, that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe to me here on YouTube. And until next time, bye. Good girl.